So begins I Science Do You. It's a new video venture in which I, as a layman, take a look at what theists, anti-vaxxers, and various alt-med proponents, etc., present as proof. Outright science denial, germ theory denial, HIV denial, etc. may also get a gander. Now, my goal is to take a look at issues presented, familiarize myself if necessary, and then determine if said criticism is presented in the proper context. This is not a deep dive, but an overview of sorts. It gives the listener a starting point to further information so they themselves can determine veracity. If time allows, I will add any ongoing discussions or current research that I may feel adds to the discussion, and that'll be included in the show notes. So, the other day, while scrolling through one of my many debate groups, I found the following video being offered as proof against evolution. I'm going to call this the proof video. Nothing is unusual until one realizes that the speaker in the proof video is one Jonathan Wells. The group in question that this was presented in is a fan group of sorts of one Kent Hovind. Yes, Dr. Dino. You see, while Wells does have a PhD in molecular and cell biology, which, by the way, nicely fits the requirement of appeal to authority that many creationists so love, he is also part of the Unification Church and has been since 1974. Yes, Wells is a Mooney. Theologically, Wells and Hovind are miles apart. Something you would think that an educated career twat would be aware of. At least it would be of concern regarding other matters. Why not here? It should be at least enough to question information presented. But nope. In his book, Icons of Evolution, Science or Myth, published in 2000, which is referenced in the first half of said video, Wells states that a number of examples used to illustrate biology textbooks were grossly exaggerated, distorted truths, or were patently false. Wells said that this shows that evolution conflicts with the evidence and so argues against its teaching in public schools. And based on this, I can see why a Christian creato-twat, which I'm assuming this individual is Christian, would cite Wells. The views fall in line with creationism from a non-scientific point of view. Wells has also stated in the past that destroying Darwinism was his motive for studying Christian theology at Yale, which he has a PhD in as well, and going on to seek his second PhD at Berkeley, studying biology and, in particular, embryology. Quote,
"Father's words, my studies, and my prayers convinced me that I should devote my life to destroying Darwinism, just as many of my fellow unificationists had already devoted their lives to destroying Marxism. When Father chose me, along with about a dozen other seminary graduates, to enter a PhD program in 1978, I welcomed the opportunity to prepare myself for battle."
End quote. So my interest was piqued. Why was a Hovindite citing a Mooney? Especially when Wells's statements, as viewed by the scientific community, is evidence that Wells lacks proper scientific objectivity, and he mischaracterizes evolution by ignoring and misrepresenting the evidence supporting it while pursuing his own agenda, promoting notions supporting his religious beliefs in its place. In other words, this lack of objectivity by Wells disqualifies any consideration to his views. At least it does in my opinion. Now, before we delve into this, It's come to my attention while I was information gathering that the interview clip in question presented in the proof video may be a bit out of context. The points are valid Wells' criticism. He does make these claims in his book, as far as I can tell. But Wells' commentary appears to be edited or clipped in some manner. I think I may have found the original, the full version video that this is part of. And I'm beginning to wonder if this proof video is not an edited copy of his interview for the longer video. Something doesn't quite jive from an editing standpoint, but I just can't pin down one. Now, while I am biased in my opinion of Wells, and of course his book, by association, bear in mind I have never read it, nor have I read any of the reviews, at least prior to finishing this. So, while I am certain the points presented are Pratt's, let's see what this layman can do in countering said claims. Now, keep in mind, after I finished my initial research, I did consult various criticisms and reviews of his book to clarify thoughts and to make sure I wasn't so off base to make a laughingstock of myself. But the overlaps are unavoidable. But it's good to know that I wasn't too far off base. So up first we have
the 1953 Miller-Urey experiment that purported to show that life could have begun spontaneously on the early Earth. And this is still found in most biology textbooks, even though geochemists decades ago decided that the experiment was unrealistic and really doesn't say anything substantial about the origin of life.
So in rebuttal, I have this. Miller-Urey demonstrated that organic molecules can form naturally from inorganic molecules. Nothing more, nothing less. They made no claims as to the origin of life. It's just one way that organic molecules can form. But here is my biggest gripe. Wells has a PhD in molecular biology and cell biology. This is an individual that is well versed in biology and should know that the origins of life is not part of evolutionary theory. This just demonstrates what a lying sack of shit he is. Evolution could be totally refuted, but this would have no effect on any of the proposed theories of the origin of life. In a normal discussion, this is a conversation stopper for me. It just really, really demonstrates how disingenuous the individual is willing to be to prove their fucking religion.
The second icon was Darwin's tree of life, the branching pattern that would show how all organisms descended from a common ancestor at the root. And this is a theoretical statement, but it's presented in most biology textbooks as though it were a fact. The fossil evidence, for example, does not show this branching tree pattern. When you look at the different major groups of animals, they appear pretty much at the same time, rather than diverging from a common ancestor.
In my opinion, what Wells is indirectly implying by his tree of life bullshit is that the Cambrian explosion was too short a time period for evolution to occur. In his mind, all major animal groups appeared together in the fossil record, fully formed. Now, the Cambrian explosion occurred approximately 5.43 million years ago. During an interval of 20 million years or so, we see the appearance and rapid diversification of most major living animal body plants, or phyla, in the fossil record. Despite the claims of some, Wells included, the Cambrian was not the beginning of multicellular animal life, as the fossil record extends back at least 30 million prior to that. As noted biologist Keith Miller notes, quote,
Defining the Cambrian explosion is not as straightforward as it might seem. Although there was clearly a major burst of evolutionary innovation and diversification in the first 20 million years or so of the Cambrian. This was preceded by an extended period of about 40 million years during which metazoans, multicellular animals, arose and attained critical levels of anatomical complexity. The Ediacaran saw the appearance of organisms with fundamental features that would characterize the later Cambrian organisms, such as three tissue layers and bilaterally symmetric bodies with the mouth and anus, as well as the first representatives of modern phyla. The base of the Cambrian is not marked by a sharp dramatic appearance of living phyla without Precambrian roots. It is a subjectively defined point in a continuum. The Cambrian explosion appears to have had a very long fuse.
end quote. In other words, set against the overall backdrop of the Earth's geologic and biologic history, the relative short time span for the Cambrian explosion is small by comparison.
The third icon I wrote about was homology in vertebrate limbs. If you look at the bone structure of the human hand or the human arm, you compare that to a whale's flipper or a bird's wing or a bat's wing, there are certain striking similarities in the bone structure. And Darwin considered this to be a result of common descent. But people before Darwin had noticed the same thing, and they called it, they attributed it to a common designer. Well, the truth is, it could be either one. The bone structure itself doesn't tell us.
So, as Wells puts it, it's common descent versus common design. It could be either one. What I believe Wells is saying, homology is defined as similarity due to common ancestry. But then it's claimed to be evidence for common ancestry. In Wells's mind, this is a circular argument masquerading as scientific evidence. Now, since homology is a little bit new to me, I asked around, and this is how it was explained. In the video clip, Wells makes mention of a human hand and arm compared to a whale flipper or bird and batwing, and we'll come back to that point. What he ignores at this juncture, a whale flipper, a bird or batwing, and a human hand and arm have very different functions from a design or engineering standpoint. By default, no intelligent design is apparent that might explain the similarities of their bone structure. Therefore, these bony similarities favor the explanation that they were inherited from a common ancestor, in this case, the same ancestral tetrapod. This explanation is supported by fossil evidence showing that presumed common mammalian ancestors similar to those of modern mammals. One point to keep in mind, or maybe another way to think of it, evolutionary theory predicts homologies, that related organisms will share similarities that are derived from common ancestors. Now, back to the bird bat wing, and this is just a little side note. I find it really odd that Wells mentions a bird wing or a bat wing in the same breath, as the two are analogous, not homologous. That is, they have separate evolutionary origins, but they are superficially similar. In my opinion, from my point of view, this is something he should know, and they shouldn't even be mentioned in the same breath. But who knows? So I had hoped to cram all 10 rebuttals into one segment. Haha. Yeah, that didn't quite work out so well. So there will be a part 2, and possibly a part 3 to this little series. My goal was to keep these segments around 12 to 15 minutes, as I know I don't have the voice stamina to go longer. So I hope you enjoyed this first part. I should have the second and possibly third part out soon. Stay smart.